So good morning. Again, I'm Anna Baskin, Senior Risk Manager at Amazon, and I'll be your moderator for today's panel, How Threat Intelligence Can Transform Your Security Posture. Threat intelligence is a highly valuable component of any enterprise risk management program, and we're excited to have some great speakers on the panel today who are leaders in the threat intelligence world to share their insights into this very important field. So the panelists are Don Maclean, ICIT Fellow and Chief Cybersecurity Strategist at DLT, John Kupcinski, ICIT Fellow and Cybersecurity Director at KPMG, and Todd Helfrich, ICIT Fellow and VP of Federal at Anomali. So maybe just to get started, can you guys help us define the different types of indicators which are shared and digested in the threat intelligence programs and what they can be used for?
I can go ahead and start if you guys don't mind. There's a number of information sharing programs available today. There's a number of ISACs and ISAOs that have been stood up. ISAC stands for Information Sharing Analysis Center and Information Sharing Analysis Organization. And those are stovepiped based on industry relevance and interest. And those organizations are sharing indicators like infrastructure, like IPs, like URLs, like URIs, the ability to share things that some organizations might perceive as sensitive, email addresses. There's an intrinsic value in email address from an indicator of compromise perspective. There's other ones like MD5 hashes, and there's varying levels of sophistication that's necessary to use each level of indicator type, and there's different values they bring to those organizations that are sharing those indicators.
They also include things like tactics, techniques, and procedures, whether or not what techniques they tried to use to obfuscate their intrusion attempts, and some other key information about that about those intrusions.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with both everybody. So I think that this is something that is starting to emerge, and I know that there's been a number of attempts to be able to develop out these fusion centers within both private as well as within the federal industry as well.
Great, thank you. So how does threat intelligence help augment an organization's enterprise risk management function?
So I think that this is kind of an interesting concept. So I look at threat intelligence. Threat intelligence isn't just for the Security Operations Center. So I see threat intelligence as something that can be pervasive across the enterprise. So you can use threat intelligence within DevSecOps as a way to be able to do application threat profiling. You can use threat intelligence within your supply chain risk management. To be able to identify any potential weaknesses or challenges or issues with regards to the vendors that are associated with providing services and goods to your industry. Also, from the perspective of training and awareness. So I think this is probably one of the most powerful things, because if you can identify areas that are within your organization that are specifically targeted. So if there are areas like legal or your comptroller or system administrators, and so to be able to understand the TTP's tools, techniques, and procedures, as well as specific actors that are targeting these organizations, then you can potentially add additional training and awareness, and also even additional protection mechanisms to be able to protect those groups of people.
And John, you had referenced supply security and supply chain, and indicators of compromise can provide value for an organization, whether retail, private sector, public sector. If you look at, I've got some commercial customers that are doing brand monitoring, if you will, and security and supply chain monitoring. What they're essentially doing is they're identifying all the partners that they do business with, and they're looking for compromised domains that might influence. It could be a phishing URL for one of their commercial partners, could be a compromised credential, and what they're doing is they're managing risk within their environment, because an impact to one of their business partners impacts their ability to do business with them and could increase the risk of that enterprise, right? So that's definitely a significant one. So is training that you were talking to.
And what are some of the barriers that have existed that prevent organizations from fully utilizing threat intelligence?
Well, I think, especially in the intelligence community and any government agency that's involved with classified information. One of the big barriers to adoption is that everyone wants to share someone else's information, but they don't want to share their own information. Right? And that sounds a little bit like an accusation of selfishness, but it's really not. If you're dealing with very, very sensitive information, you want to make sure that you don't share that out and expose to the enemy your weaknesses and your vulnerabilities, or inadvertently just share something that's inherently classified as well. So that's one of the big barriers to adoption, is just that fear of sharing the information that might show something about me. And as I think James was talking about earlier today, even just the metadata can be very, if aggregated and analyzed with machine learning systems, can tell an awful lot about what's going on in your organization. So even just the metadata about your organization's weaknesses can be tremendously revealing. So that's a big fear, especially in government. As well, there are just some technical difficulties sometimes. I think a lot of agencies or a lot of organizations are just looking at some of the infrastructure can be a little bit complicated, a little bit convoluted, and I think that can present some headaches. You know, do I need to get a new person to manage and take care and feed this whole threat intelligence system? And they've also got to look at the holistic thing, the people, process, and technology, not just the technology.
And if I can add to that, I think one of the challenges that we've had over a long period of time is this is a growing industry, right? Threat intelligence is new to some organizations. Some folks, whether it be commercial or private public sector, don't have threat intelligence teams, people that focus on threat intelligence. And I think as our industry is maturing, what we're seeing is standards have changed, right? Standards, there was IODEF, people were using Post-it notes to pass information back and forth. They moved to email, then to spreadsheets. And what we've done is we've evolved into sticks. I think everybody started to say, yeah, sticks is something that DHS put together with MITRE. It's been migrated from a standards body perspective over to IASIS, which is an international organization. And that is helping, I think, our organization. But there's still this disconnect between the indicator of compromise and what we know is bad and we know that could harm our enterprises, and the ability to do something with it. Right. So we're finding that we need to build this bridge between the technology and the indicators that we know that are tied to a nation state or APT 28 or XYZ.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I think that at least from my perspective, I see two really big challenges associated with really cultural awareness and acceptance of threat intelligence within the organization. And number one is making sure that the intelligence that you're providing out to the broader community is actionable. So anytime that you provide something out to a system administrator or a CISO or a application developer, you need to be able to answer that question of so what? So why is this important to me? And so I think that sometimes in this field we run the risk of maybe having too much information, which could potentially turn off certain people, or maybe not necessarily having enough information. And so you really need to look at the audience associated with those individual products that are coming out of your security operations center over to the broader community. The second piece, and I think this is important as well, is you need to look at threat intelligence not as a singular capability, but as a program. So it's not just a MD5 hash. It's not just an indicator of compromise. And so you really need to understand kind of the business context associated with that threat intelligence. So why is the attacker targeting that system? What information are they after? What are your crown jewels in your organization? And to be able to overlay that context, to be able to say, okay, now I understand why this individual is being targeted. I understand the external context associated with blocking this domain or understanding this command and control activity over here.
And keep in mind that, sometimes with threat intelligence capabilities, it can kind of be like that commercial where they have the bank robbery going on and the guard's standing there going, yeah, there's a robbery. It's like, you're going to do anything about it? No, I'm just here to say there's a robbery. Threat intelligence, so what? So now we've got all this intelligence. They're robbing us. Now what do we do? And the key really to work toward, that's step one. The key to work toward is automated remediation, step two, and ultimately to be predictive so that you can prevent it. You mentioned sticks earlier. One of the areas, sticks has gained some traction. Certainly a very helpful effort. It's a little bit on the wordy and bulky side, which is a big criticism of it. And one of the areas that's currently under development is the course of action keywords instead of recommendations in sticks, so that when you get a piece of threat intelligence, it's not just, hey, there's a robbery, but hey, here's what you should do about it. Ultimately, that can be worked into automating the response. You know, and that does exist in some technologies. Some vendors have that, have automated response and automated remediation. We need to get a lot of it.
We've got to make threat intelligence actionable. You know, we do have, you know, the standards that are maturing. My company released a open source technology referred to as Stacks that allows organizations to connect to anybody's taxi server and pull that in and make it operational within your environment, which is a big win we wanted to give back to industry. And we're participating in some open source technologies beyond that. But I think that delta between the technology that we need to use to defend and the knowledge that we have needs to be filled. You know, if you look at things like Grizzly Step, WannaCry was referenced earlier from a DHS perspective. Who, from a show of hands, is federal government or a federal government contractor? So a number of the folks that raised their hands probably saw an inquiry from DHS, US CERT, and from OMB in regards to Grizzly Step. And the challenge is Grizzly Step had 900 indicators that were attached to it. And the way they were distributed may not have been the most automated way to get it done. But it was a very manual process to determine whether the government agencies were impacted by those indicators. Now, as an analyst, as an ops center, think about having 900 indicators and providing a report back to, you know, to OMB and the White House and to US CERT about how they were impacted. It takes some time to put that together.
Yeah.
So I think we've talked a lot about you know, people, process, and technology sort of at a broad level. If we can do a slightly deeper dive, Don, I know you mentioned cybersecurity personnel. So does threat intelligence relieve the problem by automating threat response, or does it magnify the problem by requiring someone to manage and monitor the threat intelligence systems?
It sure does. I think initially there's going to be, when you adopt a new technology, there's always the hurdle of adapting that technology, training your people. You know, do you train the people that you have to care and feed for this technology, or do you hire a new person? So initially there is going to be a bump in the road. As you adopt this technology and as it matures, as I mentioned, the goal is automated remediation. And there are companies that can do that. Typically, of course, they will remediate systems that in their own product line. You know, if it's a firewall company, well, they might get indicators of compromise and they can update all their firewalls, but now what do I do about my endpoints? So I think initially there probably would be a bump in the road, either in terms of training or hiring new personnel. But if you keep the goal in mind, keep your eyes on the prize of automated remediation, ultimately it should, at least in theory, in a perfect world, reduce your personnel requirements. As you mentioned, you get 900 indicators. Well, you can't. One person can't do that.
It's not a human problem. It's a machine problem.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And on the technology side and the intelligence architecture, can you go a little bit deeper into all of the components, and are there any adjacent technologies that amplify a threat intelligence deployment?
I think from a threat intelligence perspective, I think there's some concerns from a cross-domain perspective, specifically within the federal government, taking data from low to high.
Yeah.
And I think that threat intelligence analysts today primarily are non-cyber. So if you think about the high side, there's folks that are doing attribution research and things of that nature. Data needs to be declassified quicker. There's organizations that are finding that there's more open source data that they can get access to quicker than what's available on the high side. That information needs to be released much more rapidly. And the reason being is because threat intelligence, cyber is changing. It's ever evolving. The indicators are popping up and going online, going offline very rapidly.
Yeah, and some of the other components, I think, are number one, common taxonomy for sharing threat indicators, such as taxi, or in the case of McAfee, they have their Todd VXL framework. Threat information exchange is what they call it. It's analogous to taxi. There's also the underlying messaging bus in the McAfee world, that's DXL, data exchange layer. That's a way of spreading these indicators of compromise to the appropriate devices quickly, or taxi in the case of the open standards as well. In terms of adjacent technologies, well, one of the key adjacent technologies, of course, is any kind of a SIM. So we can correlate 900 indicators and try and sift through them, amplified by a machine learning capability. And then typically, if you're finding, if you're sharing out, typically you will discover your, or one way of discovering your vulnerability or identifying a piece of malware, for instance, is through a sandbox. So you need to connect that sandbox to your threat sharing capability. So if it finds something, it can, it can share it out in the appropriate format.
I'd like to, and just to kind of tack on to from systems. So I'd personally like to be able to see more organizations spend more time to be able to tie their threat intelligence into their governance, risk, and compliance platforms. So I think that threat intelligence has a wealth of data that can articulate priority associated with vulnerability management and with even exception management and POAM management, and to be able to help kind of bringing it back over to the enterprise risk management concept, to be able to say if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority, how should we be able to rack and stack the remediation efforts and aspects to be able to say, okay, this is going to be more important to be able to remediate versus this over here, or we should accept this risk, or we should spend time and concerted effort to be able to make sure that we mitigate or manage this risk here.
Great. And how well does anonymization work? The organization trusted. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Sorry. Anonymization.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, one of the problems with adoption is, how do I anonymize data? I want to share my data, but I don't want to reveal too much about myself. And that actually, I think, is still an issue. Yeah. Stix has an anonymized keyword, but it has nothing to do with anonymizing my data. It has to do with how did the bad guys try to anonymize themselves. So I think that's a major area of concern that I think needs to be addressed in the standards body. OASIS, I think would do well to look at that, because that would help a lot of the agencies that have qualms about sharing out their data to do that. So I think that's an open area.
I think from a industry perspective, information sharing is slowly being adopted, right? They've been sharing for a long time. They just haven't necessarily had the technology and the mechanisms to do it in a robust scale. Organizations like the National Cyber Forensics Training Alliance have had listservs that they've shared for 15, 20 years, right? So we're getting to a point where we're maturing those capabilities.
I also think society is more accepting of a breach now. There was a time when if you got breached, it was because you were completely inept at doing cybersecurity. I think people realize now how hard it is to get that done. So it's not as big a shame to have been breached. It's more shame on the bad guy instead of shame on the victim.
But the problem is when an organization does get breached, it's the length of time it takes for them to actually share.
Yes.
Because it's not going to be immediately, right? CISA helps. The Cyber Information Sharing Act from 2015 helps a little bit for private sector to be able to share information back, and it gives them some protections. But still, you have organizations that have been compromised previously. Healthcare sector, for instance, it takes 4 months before that information actually comes out of the organization that got compromised.
Yeah, and this is a real challenge, especially from an indicator of compromise. I mean, some of these indicators are only out there for 24, 48, 72 hours. And so the speed in which you need to be able to disseminate that information needs to happen in almost near real time. And I think that a good first step, though, is these fusion centers that are popping up both within commercial as well as within federal. But that speed issue still needs to be addressed. I don't think anybody's got a good handle on that yet.
Now, what about false positives? Each organization has a tolerance level for false positives, but what happens when they received shared intelligence that might include false positives?
False positives happen. Yeah. Who's been behind a SIM or an IDS or a firewall? Ultimately, you get false positives. And I think that knowing that you're going to get false positives in the future is an important thing to note. When we talk about intelligence outside of cyber, if I'm working I'm a general in the DoD, I want every bit of intelligence that I can get, right? And I think the same holds true for cyber threat intelligence because it helps build a picture, and you find variations in the data, and it starts to tell a picture. So, it's my belief that, all intelligence is good intelligence. You need to go through and do your machine learning analytics against it. But John, what's your...
Yeah, I think trust but verify. So I think that's going to be the important key here, is that understanding that there are going to be reputable sources that are sometimes going to get it wrong. But there also needs to be an opportunity for a feedback loop. So if the intelligence was actionable, then there needs to be a way to be able to articulate it. But also, if there is a way that if it wasn't, then that also needs to be captured as well, because there might need to be some tuning and tweaking behind the scenes to make sure that information continues to get better. That's the only way that we're going to get better.
You also have situations like an IP address might have been misused, for bad purposes, but now those systems have been taken down. Now somebody else wants to use that IP address, and it's on everybody's bad boy list. So that happened.
Instant DDoS.
There were Amazon customers. Sorry, that had that happen.
It's okay. She's new.
I wasn't there.
They fixed it. They fixed it. It's fine. But there is a feedback loop. If someone's using an IP address for bad purposes, and then it's taken down, and now it's a good IP address, we need a mechanism to make sure that it's unconvicted, and that we clear their record and clear their name and take that conviction off their criminal record.
So how can threat intelligence help mature organizations' security operations overall? I think we touched upon that a little bit earlier, but when you look at the Security Operations Center, can you talk a little bit more about that?
I think that ties into the false positives that we were talking about. I think security operations today are overwhelmed. There's a Carnegie Mellon report that talks about how many events per analyst hour that an analyst should work. I believe it was 8 or 10. And that's sharply different from what they're experiencing today, which is hundreds and thousands of events per analyst hour. So I think that the area where threat intelligence can help is in the analytics side, where they can bubble up the priorities for the analyst. I think that as we're trying to build and fill this gap that we have from a cyber workforce perspective, we have folks that aren't being challenged necessarily in the Security Operations Center, but they're at the point of the spear, right? But they're not necessarily satisfied in their job. And we also have to fill additional seats because the folks that aren't being satisfied because they're not really supporting the mission the way they should be, because they're going down the rabbit hole trying to find that, looking at a false positive or, running down a misconfigured system internally. I think that we provide the ability to enhance those organizations to participate in the mission and also create efficiencies. And that's really where I think that there's a win for threat intelligence within the Security Operations Center today.
Yeah, I think just to kind of pile onto that, I think that when everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. So if you're getting 150,000 alerts a day, how are you able to prioritize certain alerts versus other ones? And so knowing that the time that an analyst has is a zero-sum game. So something spent over here is something not spent over here. I think that the other benefit to threat intelligence, and it's kind of tertiarily responsible or involved with security operations, but it's with respect to spear phishing and training and awareness. And so I think that threat intelligence can help spear phishing campaigns, and so your own internal kind of training and awareness, be able to craft better training and awareness of spear phish. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think if an organization adopts threat intelligence, I think their approach should be crawl, walk, run. In other words, get the plumbing in place, get the information, get the feeds working, start there. Okay. There's a breach. What do we do now? Well, then we look at the course of action. Automated remediation or notifications that don't just tell you there's a problem, but there's a problem and here's what you can do about it. Then step 3 is let's try and get ahead of the game instead of reacting. Because to a certain extent, Threat intelligence can be viewed as basically the old virus protection, virus signatures on steroids. It's still reactive, right? Someone's got compromised and they let you know about it. What you really want is for someone to use that as part of an overall machine learning and predictive capability. That's what you want to aim for. No one's going to get there right away, but if you do the crawl, walk, run, I think that's how you can use that as a sort of a first step in maturing your overall security capability. When you keep in mind too that it can interact with some of these adjacent technologies like sandboxes and things like that, that's going to keep your people interested. Instead of just chasing down a bunch of threats, they're going to be like, hey, we get to stand up a sandbox, we get to do some analysis of this stuff, we get to figure out how to share this out to the rest of the world and be a useful partner.
And what are some of the real-world examples of the results that threat intelligence programs have driven for organizations? And maybe a question is a follow-on to that. What are some of non-traditional, unique use cases that you have seen where an organization is using threat intelligence to support other business functions?
I think, John, you started that earlier on. I think that, supply security in the supply chain is definitely an area that is helpful, and that's a non-traditional use of threat intelligence. And it's by very mature enterprises consuming threat intelligence that might have an impact to their partner supply chain. That's one of the use cases that comes to mind for me.
Yeah. One of the neat things that I helped an organization out with recently. So just a quick show of hands. How many organizations have an international presence or international missions that go out to other countries? So with those organizations, typically before you leave, or those individuals, there's typically a health briefing. So these are the diseases, the things that you need to watch out for in country. Here is a physical security brief. But what we did is we also added a cybersecurity brief as well. And so when you go out into these organizations, or when you go out into these countries, there is going to be a different risk profile from going to country A to country B. And so based upon that, you can actually tier up and down that risk profile. So maybe in some cases, you're going to take loaner laptops. Maybe in some cases, you're going to have persistent VPN. Maybe in some cases, you're going to have enhanced logging and interrogation of traffic, and also the user awareness training that's associated with those individuals who are going out to those member countries would also be specifically targeted to these are the actors, these are the things that are associated there. Yeah, that was me. Yeah.
Any? I think we're getting close to the end. Any final comments or wrap-up that you'd like to share?
I think Don had a great end on the crawl, walk, run analogy. Threat intelligence isn't something you want to do deep dive in. There's ways that you can slowly put your toes in the water and mature your organization. And I think that mature organizations are utilizing it to look at attribution, look at targets that are actually coming after them, and implementing it into their technologies for defenses. So great analogy.
Schedule, so I don't want to keep people from lunch too long.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I hope that you have that you will agree that it was very interesting, and I hope that you were able to use some of the information communicated today to improve your enterprise risk management programs. And I would also like to offer special thanks to today's panelists. Your insights were extremely valuable, and thank you for taking time from your busy schedules to help us all improve our security programs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.